Hi, this is Randall here in Texas.
And I'm Matt here in Michigan. Today, Randall and I are taking a look back at a comic book movie. We're taking a look at 1998's Blade. It stars Wesley Snipes, Boucher Wright, Stephen Dorff, Chris Christopherson, and Donald Logue. It is directed by Stephen Norrington, who's also known for The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen and Death Machine. But before we go any further, if you like this review, be sure to give us a thumbs up. Also be sure to subscribe and ring that bell for notifications on our latest videos.
In Blade, we find that we are following the vampire hunters Whistler and Blade as they work to eradicate vampires from the world. They're currently trying to track down Deacon Frost, but they soon find out that what he is planning is larger than they had ever anticipated. Blade had a $45 million budget and made about $132 million at the box office. Had average critical response, but it is very well liked by audience members. This was Marvel's first box office success. But with this box office success, Blade came with 2 direct sequels, also starring Wesley Snipes, and a TV series, notably not starring Wesley Snipes. It is the impetus for Marvel to push forward with plans for the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy as well as the original X-Men films. Matt, Blade is kind of the movie that started it all for Marvel. Looking back on it now, what did you think?
I have a lot of nostalgia for this movie, so yeah, I'm still, gonna like it and stuff. I really like, the sound, a lot of the fights in this, the visual in this. I think, Wesley Snipes does a really good job as Blade, though I think the story and some of the other elements are a little bit lesser now, watch it now. But overall, I still enjoy this film. What about you, Randall?
Oh, no, Matt. Before I can give you my first impressions and retrospects, we have to go through Cars and Movies.
Cars and Movies!
Now, it's fair to say that this is more of a car and movie because there's only one car of any note in here, but we don't get to do Mopars very often, so I can't leave this one hanging out there. In this movie and the sequels, Blade drives a 1968 Dodge Charger, has a 440 big block, and, of course, appointments for vampire hunting. In the sequels, you'll actually see that this car has UV headlights, so that way the vampires will just be vaporized in their paths. It is a pretty awesome car. It's really cool to see the baddie not having to drive a Dodge for once, because usually you see that bad guys are driving Chrysler products. This is an exceptionally rare version of the car with a 440 cubic inch engine, and would certainly be something that, even though it's a Mopar, I would allow in my garage. But now, back to the review. I kind of agree with you. What makes this fantastic to me, even though it's nostalgia, is it's very 90s. Even though we're trying to make a pretty serious, dark, gritty film, especially for the time, it's not even dark and gritty by today's standards. I mean, Deathly Hallows was probably darker and grittier than this, in retrospect. The action scenes all pretty much hold up. Wesley Snipes' Blade pretty much holds up, but it can't help being a product of the time it's from. And I think that's what hinders it the most when I go back and rewatch it. Like, there are parts where the story definitely could have been fleshed out, and it wasn't fleshed out as it could have been. A little disappointing here and there. But, I generally still enjoyed my time watching it. It wasn't like it's a bad movie or anything.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I'm right there with you on that stuff too. It is a product of its time. It does kind of feel a little bit, not to, like, maybe to a lesser sense, but kind of like The Matrix a little bit. Even in some of the fight sequences, even like one of the most famous ones in The Matrix is we get the hallway or whatever you want to say of everyone coming. We almost get a little bit similar version of that in this film too, when like Blade is going into the big stronghold or whatever you want to say at the end. So yes, I do think it is a little bit of its time and stuff too. But for one thing that I really do like about this movie, I like how it begins. I think this movie really sets the tone for the whole rest of the movie. with this beginning really well. We get the flashback scene, so we get a lot of, the motivations of Blade and stuff in this movie. And then also how we have like, the city scene and like the fast moving cars. We also have that, sexual, whatever you want to say, in with our first characters that we kind of see in this car and stuff too. I think this lays out, the whole movie right here in the beginning, all the way leading up to the first time we get to see Blade and we get to see Blade fight.
I agree with you on the beginning, even though I want to take it more to like that original scene. So it's kind of like we had said, product of its time. 90s action scene, cue the EDM. Like, gotta do that because that's how you make things hip and cool in the 90s. And then Blade shows up and just everything stops. It's like, oh my god, it's like him. He's like the vampires, urban legend of sorts. Where it's like, oh, I can't believe that that's actually Blade. That's really him. That's the Daywalker, basically, the vampire hunter. And then you get this really cool defining scene. I think what's nice about the beginning of this movie that a lot of movies kind of don't do a very good job of, especially origin films, is it immediately says we're in a lived-in world where things are already happening, things are already established. We don't have to tell the story about how Blade got his powers, or Spider-Man, or the Fantastic Four, or whatever. Everyone's okay with that. We kind of already know that. So, let's just get on with the story. Blade does that really, really well.
One thing that was kind of interesting, I do like the fight scenes and stuff, but with how, like, heavily armed and everything Blade is, most of the fight scenes that we see are, like, close range kung fu, just like people hand fighting and punching and stuff too, even though we're talking about, vampires and, different stuff like that too. So to me, it's kind of interesting that is the direction that we take, but I think it probably, looks better and stuff on film.
I mean, you gotta stake them somehow. I thought there's a couple of scenes in here where they're doing all the fighting and everything and he doesn't get his sword out. I'm like, wow, this would be a lot faster if you just, used his sword. Problem solved. Okay. But, it wouldn't have been as cool or as flashy, and it would have cost them a little bit more in, vaporizing vampires.
Rita, we gotta wait till the end to use that sword so we get that nice sword fight.
Yeah, so we get that cool out-of-nowhere swords fight. Like, Blade is well known and very famous for having a sword, but, like, Deacon Frost's character is supposed to be more of, like, a intellectual scientist type character, so I'm not quite sure how he just is good at sword fighting. I guess he practiced. Maybe it's his hobby. But there's a part of this film where, again, it's so very 90s where it just kind of goes from like this thing to this thing to this scene to this scene. Blade suffers from that dramatically. There's like a scene where you said he just broke into the vampire's compound, and then all of a sudden he's in Deacon's bedroom where the computer is, just so they can have like this reuniting him with his mom who's a vampire. And I'm like, oh wow, that was convenient. This is Deacon's home. Just walk into the room. It's fine.
Yeah, a lot of the kind of like story elements or whatever in this movie to me are a little bit of a miss and stuff too. This, I think, is another thing that we see a lot of times in like movies and stuff. I thought that the elder vampires were dispatched a little bit too easily. They're kind of like brought up as like, hey, their hands are in everything. They control the police. They're into politics and everything. And I thought that Deacon Frost, who had to wait his turn to be summoned to the rest of the group, was able to dispatch all these elder vampires who've been around, I assume, for centuries and stuff. You'd think that over that time, they would be more savvy and more knowledgeable and know how to deal with their own people than how they do. But it's just, to me, it's kind of, interesting how that was kind of, dispatched. But to me, it's kind of similar to, Joker dispatching, the rest of the gang in Tim Burton's original Batman film.
I don't know. In this, it's more like, all right, we gotta get him out of the way. The story's gotta go. We're moving on. Go forward. We need this to happen. But I like, even though they don't go into it very much, I do like this idea that they're getting to, this thought of this old, centuries old vampires living in the shadows, just surviving, versus, a younger, breed of vampires who might not be quote unquote noble, they were bitten and turned, versus born vampires. The friction that could be caused between those two castes of vampires makes sense. I wish they had kind of went into it more, like you said. That kind of just easily dispatched, easily gotten rid of, and that's it. And this could have been something that would have been an interesting thing to maybe explore further in other films. But to be fair, the Blade franchise is just like, go kill vampires, It's an action, not even adventure, just action. It's an action franchise.
I love how that we have like this greatly, elaborate marble, device to call on, like the blood god and everything. It's like, it's immaculate, never been touched kind of thing. And supposedly it's like so old, and these elder vampires, as the movie explains, just forgot it was even here.
Nice, isn't it? Apparently these geniuses forgot it ever existed.
It took him to like research everything into it. And that's another thing too. I love how, Deacon spent all this time researching into this, and it just happens to be that what he needs to make it happen is a daywalker. And we happen to have a daywalker in Blade. How convenient.
Yeah, but the other thing that's even more unbelievable about that, I mean, we're talking about a film with vampires, so you gotta put your unbelievable on different plateaus. Basically, I get the feeling they're in like Chicago or New York, one of those two. It's probably in the movie somewhere, in like the cop car or something. But they're in the United States. They're in North America someplace. This ancient ritualistic things in North America, even though it's pretty well established that vampires are from Europe.
Maybe they secretly moved this whole temple with movie magic.
You didn't think about that one, did you? You're just like, oh yeah, it's weird that this thing's like immaculate, but like it's in North America, and that doesn't make any sense. Or even better, even more on the weird scale, you had mentioned Deacon is doing all this studying. He's got computers looking at these glyphs, and the pureblood comes in and says,
"It's a dead language. The ancient text can never be translated."
Blade grabs a piece of it, shows it to Whistler, and Whistler's like, "Oh, it's talking about the blood god." I'm like, what? What? That's convenient. No one can translate it, except for that old white human dude.
I was thinking the exact same thing. Vampires, they've been around for decades, can't read their own writing. But yeah, Whistler, he just, he knows so much about vampires. He knows more about vampires than vampires do. Quite like Deacon Frost knows everything about Blade in this movie.
I told you, Blade. I know everything about you.
Everything. Even your serum, which is obviously this stuff in vials here. All right. Let's be fair. It's still just an action film, and yes, there are myriads of plot holes or like logic jumps that you have to take in order to sit down and enjoy it. And for some people, that might be unbearable. There are films where like if the logic jump is too much, I get annoyed by it. But Blade's not really one of them. It's a bunch of like little things that, yeah, they're kind of silly in and of themselves. But it's like, it's vampires and vampire hunting, and just sit back and watch Blade be, a badass for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and, have fun with it.
Yep, I agree. That's exactly how I feel about this movie too. And, talking about, good, bad CGI or whatever, some of like the vampire deaths I think were not so great, CGI kind of its time. Or other ones I think still kind of hold up pretty well. So it's kind of hit or miss, but I think a lot of it's done well, with the story and stuff too. For its time, I think it's done pretty well. And yes, the big parts are the fight scenes with the vampires and Blade and stuff, and I think this movie does a good job with that. And even with, like you said, the EDM and stuff going on in a lot of the different fight scenes and stuff too. Yes, this movie is definitely a movie of its time. You definitely watching this like, yeah, I know when this movie came out kind of thing. But, you know, for those of us, you know, that watched it during that time too, it's a movie that we have fond memories of, and I still enjoy watching this film.
Yeah, I think if you grew up on like modern MCU and DC big extravaganza films, you watch this and be like, "Whoa, it's really underwhelming." Like, yeah, but this is where things get their start, you know? When was the last time you went back and watched the original Iron Man film and you're like, "You know what? Ironmonger, a little underwhelming." But that's where these things get their starts. You don't get to, unless you're DC, you don't get to just start with big epic battles and you know, explosions. That's just, you need to have a spot that the audience can realistically attach themselves to before you get to that realm. And you had mentioned the CGI in particular. In order to keep it fairly realistic, fairly, you know, believable, it's pretty well tamed for the first part of the movie. It's not until you get to the climax where the CGI gets a little bit 90s cartoony. I think that the filmmakers were doing that not only to save on budget, but like a mini-cosm of, you know, we need to introduce the characters to a real, believable scenario before we give them the crazy blood god scenario at the end, or else they won't get there. We can't just start with crazy. We have to start a little bit more realistic.
It's kind of funny too, even like the blood eyes that we give Deacon Frost. I mean, talk about Scooby-Doo. Kind of reminds me of like eyes, bad CGI of the Scooby-Doo movie.
The Uncanny Valley strikes again. But of course, yeah, Matt and I are always interested to know what you guys think, especially if you haven't seen Blade before. Are you interested in seeing it? And let us know down in the not the description, that's where we write things. Let us know down in the comments where, you know, we went wrong, what we think. Are we too nostalgic? Is Blade just, you know, a bunch of crap? We want to hear from you. But don't forget to come back and visit us. We've got other flashback movie reviews, we have new movie reviews, we got TV series reviews, and we have some deeper dive discussions.
Also, be sure to check out our Facebook page. We got a lot of posts there, especially with our fandoms. We also post a day before our reviews come out to let you know what the topic of the review is going to be. Our reviews come out every Monday and Thursday. For now, I'm Matt here in Michigan. Have a good day.
And I'm Randall here in Texas. See everyone next time.
Next time on No Market Media. Please consider checking out some of our other videos.